Hey, what's up, guys? This is Brett coming at you today to talk a little bit about Cisco's newest release of Call Manager, Call Manager version 14. So this release dropped last week, and I was pretty quick to download it because I wanted to take a look at some of Cisco's most anticipated features that they've been advertising for coming out with soon. So this, for the most part, this release was jam-packed with a ton of features. I'm not going to go through all of them today. It wouldn't be a good job if I did, anyways. But if you're interested in the features that Cisco came out with in version 14, I'd encourage you to take a look at the release notes. So I'll just pop over to the release notes real quick and just give you an idea for what I'm talking about. And you can do this for any different release that Cisco has come out with. But in version 14, the three main kind of categories or features that I think are important that I want to discuss with you all today is the containerization of Tomcat and what that means to you and your organization. Also, there's a number of different certificate management serviceability features that Cisco came out with, and we'll talk about that here in a few moments. But probably the most important feature, or the feature that I've been waiting for probably a year now, is this ability for endpoints to do SIP-based OAuth for encrypted TLS connections. And so traditionally, what this looks like is if you want to encrypt your signaling and establish secure real-time protocol, so secure media, you had to flip your cluster into mixed mode, and you had to generate certificate trustless files. You had to push locally signed certificates out to your phones, and it was kind of a tedious manual process. And it took, it probably took a typical administrator a couple hours, just depending on how many phones you wanted to push those locally assigned certs out to. So with SIP-based OAuth, it takes about 10 minutes, and there is no pushing out certificates to endpoints. The endpoints, once they're registered, go out and download the OAuth token automatically, transparently to the administrator and to the user after the initial configuration is set up. So, anyways, we'll showcase how that is configured here in the next few moments. But at a high level, those are some of the most important features I think Cisco came out with in version 14. So, stepping back a little bit and talking about Tomcat. So, if you didn't know, Tomcat is the service that runs this web administration view and at least provides insight into some of the back-end processes that Cisco Communications Manager runs in the past. Things like administrative XML or Axel for talking to the API. It's also used for single sign-on. So if you use Jabber and you use single sign-on to get access to dial tone, call management services, voicemail services, instant message, obviously, then they're using the native browser, which communicates to the Tomcat service. So in version 14, these are all containerized, which means you have the ability to isolate these services individually, which in theory should lead to more stability, higher performance, and something that's easier to troubleshoot. So just quickly, I've logged into the command line of my communication manager. The command is something, it's utils container engine, and you can hit question mark just like any iOS device and see there's a few different options now within the CLI. You have the ability to see the status, which I'll show you, but then certainly the ability to restart certain containers, stop containers, start them back up. So the three different types of containers that have been running, that have been kind of broken out from the traditional Tomcat service, which is pre UCM14 code, are the UDS container, the Axle container, and the SSO single sign-on container. And as you can see, that they have their own separate instance. They have their own separate CPU that have been allocated to these containers, memory, so on and so forth. So just to kind of give you a ballpark feel for what this means to you, in the past, whenever I've had to restart the Tomcat service, maybe it's because I uploaded a new certificate for the Tomcat service or something. Maybe I had to restart a server and the Tomcat service just happened to automatically restart along with it. Typically, you get to plan on 10, 15, 20 minutes even. So you walk away, go to the bathroom, get a snack, a drink, do whatever you need to do. And then when you come back 15, 20 minutes later, you just hope that you can log back into the web admin GUI. So with version 14, I just upgraded it, so I've only tried this a few times now. Give or take, within 5 minutes after restarting the Tomcat service, I was able to log back into the GUI. So overall, I'm already starting to see performance enhancements and haven't really kicked the tires yet on any of these other different little containers that Cisco has offered in the version. So it's pretty neat. It's a pretty modern way of developing applications, and it's nice to see that Cisco is doing that for one of the most important services, which is the Tomcat service. So let's look at configuration of certificates, since that's probably the number 2 common theme for version 14, in my mind at least. And of course, certificates reside in the OS administration page. So I got to flip over there. And as we wait for these screens to pull up, just to kind of start with something very simple and easy, you have the ability to just filter based on the kind of use that a certificate is there for. So most administrators will appreciate this, but you have your individual identity type cert, and within Communications Manager, you have your other different types of certs that you trust that help you develop that trusted certificate chain. So your root CA certificate, your intermediate CA certificate, and anything in between helps you develop that certificate chain. This helps you quickly, log in, isolate what are your identity certs, who are they issued by, what are expiration dates, were they signed by a CA server, things of that nature. Oh, how are they distributed? So you can see in here, I have a few different multi-server SAN certificates, and we'll talk about those here in a second. But that's very simple. The other thing that I'll quickly point out is the ability to reuse certificates. And so this is kind of related to Tomcat, which I talked about earlier, that a lot of organizations are using, whether you know it or not, for things like single sign-on. So when you use a certificate that for things like Jabber and single sign-on, typically speaking, that is a CA signed certificate. There's a few different reasons for that, but one of which is to eliminate any kind of error message that's being pushed to the Jabber client that would require some sort of user intervention to accept a untrusted certificate, which is what you would see if you were pushing out a self-signed certificate. Well, anyways, most organizations probably have CA signed certificates for the Tomcat service. And so if you got into a situation where you needed to reuse that certificate for the call manager service, as an example, it's within 2 clicks you can do that. So I can see, what service I have right here. This is my Tomcat. I have a traditional Tomcat. Then I also have a Tomcat ECDSA certificate, which is the elliptic curve certificate. But I'm not going to really use that because I don't have that running. And then I would just check to enable this reuse for call manager, which is useful for deploying encryption out to your phones and helping develop a certificate trust list, things of that nature, or maybe even like securing SIP trunks, and hit finish. So pretty straightforward and adds a level of simplicity. Another way that Cisco adds simplicity is around self-sign certificates. And so again, prior to version 14, you could generate self-sign certificates, but multi-server SAN field was not an option. And so multi-server SAN is subject alternative name, which is the fully qualified domain names of your nodes here in this box. And so essentially what this allows you to do is consolidate all of your self-signed certificates that you may have generated and use them for one certain service that runs within the call manager node. So this, I think, is another way of simplifying how you secure your connections within a call manager node or cluster for that matter, and simplifies the administration, the amount of time that it takes to get CA signed certificates. It may not be significant, but it's not necessarily the easiest process at the same time. So hopefully you appreciate that. And if you ever have dealt with certificates before in the past, then I'm sure you would appreciate it. While we're here, I would say that Cisco also added a nice little compliance feature. And so a lot of organizations, for various reasons, don't like using self-signed certificates. Sometimes there's a need for using self-signed certificates, and people understand that, and security policies are okay with that. But a lot of times, organizations were not okay with the inflexible nature of using self-signed certificates in Call Manager. So as you can see here, we have the ability to minimize the validity period to as little as 5 years, or maximize it for as much as 20 years. I think before in the past, it was just a standard 10-year kind of carte blanche type of request if you wanted to generate a self-signed certificate. But now you have the option, in addition to the key length and the hash algorithm, to customize the validity period for self-signed certs, and also to make a single cert valid for additional nodes in the cluster. So pretty good stuff here. Now, what I want to do is show you one more thing about certificates. And it has to do with a new trust store that Cisco came up with in version 14, mainly to support the SIP-based OAuth tokens for securing connections to Communications Manager. So I've already configured it, so kind of eliminated some of the work for you already. But the one of the requirements is to upload the CA signed certificate to something called the Phone Edge Trust Store. And my CA name is Beast, so you can see the Beast CA here. And that's there to kind of validate at the highest level that certificate chain. It'll make more sense when we pop over to the administration page, which we're going to do now, and take a look at the configuration guide for SIP OAuth. So again, SIP OAuth is something that I've been kind of waiting for a while. And in full kind of transparency, if you don't mind, I want to kind of give a shameless plug for something that me and my buddy, Nick Smith, wrote about. So we came up with a book. I don't know if you can see it. It's called Practical Cisco Unified Communication Security. And so me and a buddy, Nick, we developed it. It just shipped in December of 2020. So it's been shipping now for 3 or 4 months. And our idea for this book was that security shouldn't be hard. There are some things that could kind of add complexity, but for the most part, there are many different practical things that anyone can do to start reaping some immediate benefits of locking down and securing your UC environment. So that's the basis of this book. I'll drop a little link to it in the comments section. Hopefully you guys can check it out and let me know what you think about it. But when we wrote the book, only SIP-based OAuth was available for the Jabber client. And so we were anxiously waiting, and we had kind of heard a little bit internally about it coming in a later release. We weren't quite sure if it was coming in a system update of 12.5 or 14. It ended up being 14. And so anyways, we kind of had to mention it was coming out in a later date. So anyways, we've been waiting on this for a long time, and now it's here. And I got to say, it's pretty straightforward with configuring. I kind of alluded to it earlier. It's about 15 minutes of configuration, if that. I've already configured it, but you can see it's literally like 7 steps if you're not doing MRA for your endpoints, which, you know, maybe at some point we'll talk about, and we'll do a video on MRA. But 7 steps, and I've already kind of talked about the CA certificate to the Phone Edge Trust Store. The next is kind of what your traditional steps might be, and so I'll just kind of walk through these steps and show you where you would configure those things within the CUCM interface. So the first thing is to go in and make sure that the OAuth enterprise parameter is configured, which, you know, it should be by default. And that's under System and Enterprise Parameters. If we just do a search for SSO, the 2 different configurations are here: implicit and then OAuth with refresh login flow enabled. And so real quickly, before in the past, it was only through, with 12.5, you had only what they would call explicit OAuth access token grants. And you had to use activation codes in order to onboard to the cluster and get an OAuth token. And so, you know, it was kind of an extra step, and many customers weren't doing MRA, and so, you know, it wasn't something that was possible. But now it is possible. And so with 14, the default is for issuing an implicit OAuth-based grant for devices that are already registered. So all you have to do is just have a registration with a UCM cluster, and it could be obviously an unsecure registration. And once you enable these 7 steps, you can start communicating, and that communication can be encrypted and secure. And so maybe that'll help you rest easy at night. But the other one is login flow. And so with OAuth, if you're not very familiar with OAuth, it has a period where tokens expire. So if you're not online for a certain amount of time, your OAuth token would expire. But similar to like DHCP, where every so often it goes out and renews its lease, the same thing happens with OAuth. So it renews its length that the token is valid for. And so as long as you're online, the token, I think, is valid forever. And so you just got to make sure you're plugged into the network, and it will always go out and renew itself, and you're good to go. The only time you're in trouble is if you're unconnected from the network for a while and the OAuth token cannot renew. And so certainly from a security perspective, we can revoke these tokens at any time as well. But just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. And again, we talked about some of this stuff in the book if you're interested. So the next step is to configure the OAuth ports. And again, I don't think you really want to tweak these too much, but by default, they're already in here. I'll just go ahead and pull up one of the nodes so you can take a look. The port that OAuth uses for the phones is 5090 by default, just like 5060 for SIP and 5061 for secure SIP. SIP OAuth uses 5090 for phones, and then 5091 if the endpoint is coming in over MRA. So there's that, which is configured by default. You do have to log in to the publisher only and issue this command utils SIP OAuth mode enable. I would show you, but it's kind of a hidden command, so it's not really much to talk about. But once you enable this SIP OAuth mode enable command and restart the communications manager service, or the call manager service, I should say, the last step is to configure a phone security profile. So that's the last step that I'll show you. And once that is done and you assign the phone security profile to the phone, the phone communicates with communications manager as you would expect. It uses 6970, if I'm not mistaken, to do a TFTP connection to communications manager. It tries to get a token, and once it gets a token, it does a mutual TLS connection to do like that secure handshake with communications manager, and it pulls down that encrypted TLS profile. So real quickly, I'm just going to do a quick little search and filter for my profile. This is what it looks like. So pretty straightforward. If you've never configured a profile before, you probably want to copy an existing profile and keep your unsecure profile for phones that can't do security, or maybe you don't really care to do security. And anyways, this is for 7800 endpoints and 8800 endpoints only anyways. So once you give it a meaningful name and choose the device security mode, and like I said, by default, it's non-secure. So once you change this to encrypted, it'll automatically change the transport type to TLS. And then after that, just make sure to check off this enable OAuth authentication box and then hit save. You don't have to worry about the SIP phone port because we're using OAuth, and so this field from everybody I talked to is ignored, and it uses 5090. So going back over to my phones, I will quickly just show you one of my 8865s and how it's applied. So you'll want to apply the phone profile here. You can see, previously I was using this non-secure profile just to kind of immediately register to the phone, get a directory number assigned to the line, do some basic testing. And then once this was done, and when my OAuth configuration was finished, I was able to log into this device and assign this OAuth security phone profile. And within minutes, I had registered to communications manager, and I was good to go. Now, I had full transparency. I'm trying to be fully transparent with you guys. I did have two other phones here. As you can see, I had this 1000 device, which is an 8841, and I had this other 8865 that, for whatever reason, I couldn't quite figure out why it would not register with Communications Manager. It was doing these weird things, and finally I broke down and did a Wireshark packet capture to see what was going on, and it looked like my phone just couldn't get the OAuth token downloaded to it. And so after talking to some folks, and I actually broke down an open attack case, the engineer was like, hey, have you tried factory resetting your phone? And so that's the process of unplugging the PoE Ethernet cable. And when you plug it back in, you hold down the pound sign. And once the mute button goes off, you press 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, star 0 pound. And that factory resets the phone. Once I factory reset the phone, everything was up and running. And then within minutes, I was able to call between 8865s, and I noticed I had that lovely little lock, that beautiful, beautiful lock next to my screen. So hopefully that information is something that you guys can act on and take a look at. For me, the SIP OAuth thing might be a little bit geeky, but like I said, I just wrote a book about the topic, and many other security topics if you're interested. So if you like this video, give me a shout. Let me know what you think. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments section. But hopefully you enjoyed it, and hopefully you'll tell some of your buddies about this feature, because like I said, it's kind of a big deal, and it really simplifies how organizations can start deploying more and more security, which is again something that I think we should be doing and could easily be doing now in version 14. That's all I got, guys. Appreciate it, and have a great day. See you.